This podcast is for informational purposes only and does not constitute financial advice. Consult with a qualified professional before making any investment decisions.
Welcome to the Wire Weekly Roundup. The week in real estate presented in digestible bites. Hold on while our AI hosts take us on another ride through this week's top real estate headlines.
Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take that stack of sources you've gathered, all the articles, the reports, your notes, and really cut through the noise. We pull out the key insights just for you. So this deep dive, it's all about navigating the flood of real estate news you sent over this past week. It's been quite a few days, hasn't it?
It really has. A lot happening.
Yeah, we've got fresh data on market shifts, some pretty big developments challenging the industry structure. And, a ton of advice flying around on how to make sense of it all. Our mission today, like always, is to unpack these sources together. We want to spot the major trends, the challenges that really stand out when you look at everything.
Right.
And, crucially, pull out those actionable insights, the stuff that matters for you, the real estate professional, like right now.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let's unpack this pile of information. Looking across everything you pulled together, market data, legal updates, strategy pieces, there are definitely a few major threads starting to emerge.
That's right. And the first one, I think it's pretty undeniable, actually, is the clear signal from various data points. We're definitely seeing signs of a shifting market and, in many areas, a cooling market.
Cooling seems to be the word.
Yeah. The evidence is pretty compelling, across the sources. Take home equity, for instance. That's a key indicator.
Right.
One source points out a dip in average home equity, around $4,000 on average.
$4,000. Okay.
Now, maybe that doesn't sound massive on its own, but psychologically, it's a real shift for homeowners, especially after years of just watching that equity climb. It changes how they think about selling or refinancing, maybe tapping that equity.
Yeah, changes the conversation.
Exactly. And it's not just individual homes either. The sources also show that the overall household real estate asset value actually fell at the start of the year.
The aggregate value.
The aggregate, yeah. The total pie owned by households, it shrank just slightly, which reflects more than just prices slowing down, right? It's an actual reduction in total wealth held in property.
Okay, that's a broader view.
And then we get more specific data on home price growth, really confirming that slowdown. There was one article, it specifically called out 141 individual markets.
141.
Yeah, where prices were actually falling as of June 2025.
Wow. Not everywhere, but definitely pockets.
Right. It's not a nationwide crash signal, but it shows where that cooling is hitting hardest. Could be an early indicator for other places.
So what about the supply side? Builders.
Good question. Further evidence there, too. A key survey mentioned shows builder confidence has dropped. Lowest level since 2023.
Since 2023. Okay.
Builders are, super sensitive to market sentiment and what they think future demand will be. So when they get hesitant like this, it signals concern about the sales environment ahead.
Which probably means fewer starts down the line.
Often does. And it's not just new homes. Some reports in your sources mention certain investors are starting to sell off homes, from their portfolios.
Investors cashing out. Why now?
Well, it could be softening returns, or maybe they anticipate a further downturn and want to move capital. Either way, it adds a bit more supply pressure in certain segments.
Okay, so let me recap this first theme.
Yeah.
We've got dips in average equity, the total asset value slightly down, specific markets seeing price drops, builders getting nervous, and some investors selling. That really does paint a different picture than, say, a year or two ago. Feels like a definite shift in phase.
It absolutely does. A change in temperature, for sure.
Yeah.
So the question for you becomes, if you're working with sellers right now, how are you framing this?
Yeah.
How do you manage their expectations around pricing, around timing, even negotiations, when the data shows equity dipping and growth slowing?
Those conversations need a careful touch.
Absolutely. Informed by these kinds of data points.
Okay, so that's the market cooling.
Yeah.
But here's where things get really interesting and maybe a bit unsettling. Because running parallel to these market shifts, your sources are full of these pretty huge structural and legal challenges.
Yeah.
Things hitting the industry itself.
Exactly. That's the second major theme. And maybe even more disruptive, in the long run. The industry structure itself is really under fire. especially the legal landscape.
Okay, like what specifically?
Well, one big development mentioned is the NAR, the National Association of Realtors. Their membership structure and their fees, they're facing a new lawsuit.
A new one.
Yeah.
Separate from the commission cases.
Separate, yeah. This one directly challenges how the organization operates, how it gets its revenue. It's questioning some really foundational stuff.
Another layer of challenge then.
Another piece of the puzzle questioning those established norms. And speaking of the commission lawsuits, the sheer scale of claims is just wow.
How many are we talking now?
The sources say over 2.5 million claims filed.
2.5 million.
Yeah. That number isn't just big, it shows how widespread this is. It underlines the huge potential financial hit and the systemic challenge to a whole brokerage commission model.
It suggests this isn't some fringe issue. It's massive.
Yeah.
Affecting a huge number of transactions participants. Yeah.
Then the sources also get into what they're calling the MLS power struggle.
Multiple listing service, right?
Right. Ongoing battles over listing rules, data access. This is like where the rubber meets the road for how agents cooperate and share info.
So day-to-day impact stuff.
Big time. And that MLS PIN deal with the DOJ, the Department of Justice finally getting approved after a long fight.
I saw that mentioned.
That's a really concrete example of these battles playing out. It's reshaping the rules for listing data, for access, potentially changing how agents list properties, maybe even how they get paid.
And I noticed outlets like RIS Media, which popped up in your sources, they're covering this constantly.
Oh, absolutely. Industry news is all over this because it hits everyone's business.
Underscores how central it is.
Yeah. And beyond the big class actions, we're also seeing updates on individual companies like MV Realty having listing agreements terminated down in Florida.
Yeah.
Questions about their business practices.
And even internal stuff, like a former CFO suing Real alleging discrimination.
So challenges from outside and inside.
Yeah, it shows the pressure isn't just external. Brokerages are dealing with various angles.
And you mentioned Real. That brings up companies like them or, say, EXP Realty, these different models. They seem inherently part of this whole conversation, right? About how agents work, how they're paid, which is exactly what these legal challenges are questioning.
Precisely. The scale of these claims, the potential rule changes, they're not small tweaks.
No.
They could fundamentally alter commission models, data sharing, even how agents affiliate with brokerages.
So this is an abstract legal theory.
Not at all. This directly impacts your business model day to day. The agreements you sign with clients, how you access MLS data, how you market properties, ultimately your income.
Which leads to the critical question.
Yeah. How are you actually planning for this? Preparing for potential changes from these huge legal and structural shifts, just hoping it won't affect you? That feels like a pretty risky strategy right now.
Definitely something to think hard about. Okay. But, despite these market shifts, these big industry challenges, deals are still happening. Activity hasn't just stopped.
No, it hasn't.
And maybe more importantly, your sources are packed with concrete, actionable strategies, ways for you and your clients to navigate all this.
Which leads us straight into the third major theme we pulled out. Amidst all the flux, all the uncertainty, the sources you gather are really rich with practical advice. It's like a toolkit.
A toolkit for adapting.
Exactly. Adapting strategies for buyers, for sellers, and for investors, too.
Okay, let's break that down. What's in the toolkit for buyers?
A lot, actually. Guidance on rate-lowering strategies like temporary buy-downs, help understanding underwriting, which can be tougher now, navigating escrow smoothly, tips for buying FSBO, for sale by owner, how to still win a bidding war if you hit one, practical steps for buyers to improve their finances beforehand, and how to use programs like FHA loans effectively. It's pretty detailed.
So really tactical advice for buyers. What about sellers?
For sellers, the advice is really focused on preparation. How to maximize their position in this cooler market. Things like essential pre-listing repairs plumbing, for example, that could kill a deal.
The unsexy stuff that matters.
Totally. Other repairs needed before staging to boost appeal. And really practical steps on what to do if your house didn't sell the first time around.
Ooh, that's relevant for some right now.
Yeah. And also navigating their side of escrow once they do get an offer.
Okay. And investors.
Investors get specific guidance, too. The sources laid out, 7 distinct steps for buying a rental property in 2025. Advice on how to keep investing even when the market feels tricky.
Keep calm and invest on.
Sort of. It emphasizes the importance of preventative maintenance on rentals way cheaper than reactive fixes, and even gets into how AI tools are starting to change the game for investors, finding deals, managing properties.
AI is everywhere now.
It's creeping in. And the sources also touch on other strategies, like using that built-up equity to downsize, maybe buy the next place in cash.
Leveraging that past appreciation.
Right. And also really understanding homeowners insurance, the nuances, the rising costs. That's a growing piece of the affordability puzzle.
So it really shows that while things are shifting, there are ways to work within the current market. It just requires being more informed, more strategic.
Absolutely. It's not a listed high and hope market anymore.
Your value is really in being that advisor.
Exactly. This advice is your toolkit. Your value comes from helping clients understand these strategies, anticipate the bumps, navigate the complexity, which makes me wonder, which specific bits of this advice are your clients asking about most right now? What's top of mind for them this week?
That's a good practical question. Okay, so we've talked cooling market, legal upheaval, strategies for navigating. But speaking of complexities, let's touch on something that honestly felt a bit surprising when you put it next to all the cooling market data.
Yes. This was the interesting contradiction that really jumped out, because while you have all these signs, cooling prices, equity dips, falling builder confidence, other data points seem to paint an almost opposite picture. Resilient buyer activity, even rising consumer optimism about buying.
Wait, rising optimism? How so?
Well, one source reported just this week, actually, June 11th, that overall mortgage demand, it rose.
Rose?
Yeah, to its highest level in over a month. That's not buyers pulling back. That's more potential buyers talking to lenders.
Okay, more activity there.
And then another source specifically notes that consumer optimism about buying is actually up.
Up. Why?
The reason cited was easing consumer anxiety.
Okay, less anxiety makes sense. But optimism about buying when prices are softening and equity dipped.
Yeah.
That is surprising.
Right, that's the disconnect.
So how do we square that? Rising mortgage demand, rising consumer optimism, but falling equity, slower price growth, nervous builders.
Yeah.
Feels like conflicting signals.
It does seem like a paradox at first glance, but maybe it suggests there's a segment of the market, perhaps a pretty significant one, that just isn't deterred by the headlines.
Who might they be?
Could be buyers who were priced out before, maybe sidelined by high rates. Now they see stabilizing rates, maybe slightly softer prices, and think, okay, maybe now.
Or maybe they just improved their own finances.
That too. Or perhaps they're focused on the long game. You know, the sources that talk about why real estate is still worth it, or that 5-year rule for price perspective.
Right, the long-term view.
These buyers might be looking past the immediate noise. They need a place to live. They want long-term wealth building. They believe in real estate over time. For them, maybe anxiety is easing, not because the market's suddenly hot, but because they feel more control or see a clearer path for themselves.
Interesting. So it's not necessarily a contradiction, but maybe different segments reacting differently?
Could be. Which raises a really important question for you. How do you identify this more optimistic, active buyer segment? And how do you work with them effectively? What are they responding to that others aren't? Understanding their motivations seems key right now.
Okay. So let's try and pull all this together then from everything in your sources. We've got a market clearly shifting, cooling in many ways.
Check.
At the same time, the industry's foundations, the rules, are facing these huge legal and structural challenges.
Yeah.
But amidst that, there's a clear need for smart, adaptable strategies for buyers, sellers, investors.
The toolkit.
And then the surprising pocket of rising buyer demand and consumer optimism.
The paradox.
So after diving deep this week,
Yeah.
what's the single biggest picture takeaway? What should you really be focusing on from all this?
I think the most important thread weaving through all these sources is this. Success right now. It demands more than just tracking supply and demand, prices, the usual market economics, though you absolutely still need that.
Okay, more than just the economic.
Yes. It's equally, maybe even more, about understanding and navigating the rapid, profound legal and structural shifts happening inside the industry itself at the same time.
So the market and the rules of the game changing simultaneously.
Exactly. These two forces, market economics and the evolving industry rules from lawsuits, regulations, they aren't separate. They're intertwined. And they're rapidly impacting how deals get done, how pros like you operate.
So being an expert means
It means being agile, You need expertise in the market's economic nuances and in the shifting legal and operational landscape. Both are critical to providing value and navigating the uncertainty.
That feels really crucial. It's not just knowing the comps anymore.
No.
It's knowing the comps and understanding how a court ruling might impact commissions or how new MLS rules affect data access.
It's the micro and the macro, the market and the mechanics of the business itself.
Got it.
And thinking about the speed of change we saw just this week, market stats shifting, the scale of lawsuits, even new tech like AI for investors, there's a lot to process, a lot to integrate into your practice.
It's moving fast.
Very fast. So maybe a final thought for you to chew on looking ahead. Out of everything we discussed from this week's news, the cooling signs, the legal stuff, new strategies, that surprising buyer optimism, what single piece of information, what single trend do you think will have the biggest, most tangible, long-term impact on your specific business in the next year? Where should you focus your energy? It's worth considering.
That is a powerful question to reflect on after processing all this. Well, thank you for joining us for this deep dive into your sources. We really hope this helped you cut through some of that noise, get to the core insights from the past week's real estate news, and gives you something solid to think about as you navigate this very dynamic market.
If you're interested in your own personalized edition of The Wire, please visit us at thewire.fm/custom. We offer market-specific podcasts with all the latest real estate news and market analysis delivered to you weekly or monthly. Own your market with a personalized edition of The Wire, The Week in Real Estate. Thank you for listening.